All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. So many of you tuned in for the deep dive Saturday night, only to be disappointed. And sorry, guys, we're gonna have to put that one off till next Saturday. No big deal, but you know the bad weather caused caused a bit of a kerfuffle on the back end of the production side. So do it next time. Sergeant Major says coffee with friends for the win. Indeed, indeed. Cup of hot Joe. So this morning we're going to be talking about perception and reality. Last week we covered, of course, we covered all of the madness going on around Minnesota, Minneapolis, the terrorists attacking the church. This morning, well, okay, let me back up. We talked about all that madness, and on Friday last. For Firearms Friday, instead of spending a lot of time on firearms the way we usually do, we had the very good news that several arrests had been made in connection to those terrorists invading the church. And I'm sorry, I will no longer use the word protester. Right? A protesters are what people on January 6th look like. Right? They showed up with signs. They made demands. They went to a public place. They went to public property, a traditional public forum. They didn't attack people. They didn't murder people. They didn't invade a private establishment. They didn't force themselves into a place where they were not legally allowed to be. Right? Now, fair play. There was some property damage. There was some unpleasantness around January 6th. But let me remind you of a few things that are worth understanding. The only people who died on January 6th were the two women that were murdered by Capitol Police officers, neither of whom was armed, neither of whom was doing violence against either of the officers. Okay? Yes, Ashley Babbitt appeared to be trying to crawl through a broken window. Okay. Roseanne Boland doesn't appear that she had done anything apart from be there. Right? It can be argued that Ashley Babbitt was on the wrong side of the law, but there is no evidence that she made any particularly hostile action. In fact, what it looks like is the shithead cop just drew his weapon and fired into a crowd. Right? It doesn't look like he intentionally shot Ashley Babbitt so much as he fired his weapon into a crowd. And he was lauded as a hero. That entire activity, the entire activity of January 6th that we've been told over and over again was the worst terrorist incident in history, in U.S. history. It's the worst thing to happen since 9/11 at least. That entire incident, there were no casualties other than the two women who were murdered by Capitol Police officers. And the entire thing happened over the course of about 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours after the protesters entered the building, the protesters had been removed from the building. Now, compare and contrast that to the Summer of Love, where we had literally months, 6 months of buildings being lit on fire, people being murdered in the streets all across the country, and the terrorists in question setting up autonomous zones. I don't know. I cannot get my head around how it appears that people don't understand the significance of this. Setting up the autonomous zone, y'all, that's something we do in the Army. We drop HESCO barriers. We use a bulldozer to fill them up with sand. We put concertina or razor wire around the top of them. We start bringing in chews and trailers and generators and establish an operational position. It's called building a COP, command outpost, or a TOC, tactical operational center, or a FOB, a forward operating base. Right? When you start putting in fortifications, taking command and control of physical territory and holding it by force, as the left-wing terrorists did throughout the Summer of Love, and, by the way, are doing again now in Minnesota. There's a new, I don't have that article pulled up. Let me pull that article up to share with you. I've got a few up. There's a new autonomous zone in Minnesota. Maz, got this one from Human Events. I think that's, yeah. There we go. So an autonomous zone. Let's be very clear on what it means to establish an autonomous zone. That is explicit military activity. That is the conduct of strategic warfare against the host nation. So for all that the left wanted to cry insurrection over the protest on January 6th, a bunch of conservatives, a bunch of MAGA supporters, a bunch of Trump voters did not barricade themselves into a position and open fire and engage in direct conflict with the police, with law enforcement, with National Guard. Any of that. Nothing. They showed up en masse to a traditional public forum and attempted to speak freely and petition the government for redress of serious grievances. Grievances which, by the way, because remember, it was Stop the Steal. Grievances which we now know conclusively, beyond any controversy, were absolutely founded. There is no intelligent person who can make an argument that the 2020 election was anything other than an illegitimate, fraudulent activity perpetrated on the American people. And the Biden campaign, the Democrat National Committee, and all of the co-conspirators of the Russia hoax appear to be complicit in that, and this language is important, in that conspiracy to defraud the American people. And I say it that way carefully and intentionally, because let me remind you, throughout the Russia hoax, we heard one word over and over again, right? We heard it over and over again. Conspiracy? No. Collusion. They said that Donald Trump colluded with Russia, that Vladimir Putin colluded with Donald Trump. And I've talked about this before. I've laid this out many times on the show before, but it's very important that you guys understand this. The reason that the Democrats and the media who intentionally orchestrated and perpetrated that hoax on the country used that specific language, collusion, is because the thing that they were alleging is that Donald Trump had engaged in a multinational conspiracy to defraud the American people. But they never said the words. They were very careful about not saying the exact words, conspiracy to defraud the American people, because that is the legal term of art around the thing that they were accusing him of, which we now know without any doubt was entirely made up of whole cloth, was a complete fabrication, a total hoax. And by not explicitly making the legal accusation of the specific crime as defined by statute, they sought to shield themselves from certain varieties of libel and of libel and slander liability, right? They're very clever with this, but there's absolutely a conspiracy involved there. They are doing they're doing another conspiracy. Remember, the J6 victims. Yes, victims. The people who were incarcerated by the Biden regime, held as political prisoners, were held as political prisoners on novel charges, on new legal theories which had never been applied, on charges which were clearly novel in application and had never been used to convict people in similar circumstances. The whole thing was an exercise in legal novelty to fabricate charges where none existed. At best, a reasonable legal argument could have been made that the government has the authority to control the property over which it has stewardship, and to declare on occasion that it is in hours of non-operation, at which time presence in the facility becomes unlawful. And there you have a trespass. Not an insurrection, not terrorism, not rioting, of trespassing. Those political prisoners, those victims of the illegitimate Biden regime, many of them spent years, not just in prison. Many of them spent almost their entire tenure in prison in solitary confinement without arraignment. Now, by the time Donald Trump was reelected and pardoned them, they had, I think the final number was about 95% of them had finally been arraigned, but many of them were held for over a year, and a very few of them were held for nearly full 2 years without being arraigned on the charges. Now, it was massively convenient for the regime at the time, coming off the height of the COVID pandemic, that they were able to use salacious and spurious and frankly fallacious claims about safety and health concerns, etc., to sort of pseudo-legitimize and excuse the behavior. Oh, well, their arraignment, their justice has been denied and has been delayed just because we're so busy with all the COVID stuff, making everything so much more difficult, and they're in solitary confinement for their own protection. Yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened. No, they were tortured. They were tortured by the Biden regime. And let's not forget the Utah man. What was his name? I've got the article here. What was his name? Robertson. Craig Robertson. Craig Robertson made an ill-advised threat against the life of Joe Biden. Craig Robertson, a disabled veteran who was barely mobile. Right. The fact is, with Craig Robinson's story, yes, his ex-post threatening to kill President Biden was ill-advised. In fact, it was a crime. It is illegal. It is illegal to threaten to murder someone. It's illegal to make the explicit threat that you're going to murder, right, a specific person or a category of persons, right? It is not illegal to say, I wish someone were dead. I would be happy if Joe Biden died. I wish Joe Biden were dead. But to say, I am going to go and kill the president when he shows up to give this speech at this place, now you're making an explicit claim and creating a direct and imminent threat. Okay, yeah, fair point, fair play. X, Blue Sky, Facebook, I don't care what social, TikTok, Instagram, they're flooded right now with people threatening to murder the president. Seki State, Christy Nome, Pam Bondi, right? If you have a name that people know in the Trump administration right now, or happen to be a white man or an ICE agent, there's no end of leftists on the old social media demanding your death, calling explicitly for other people to come together and kill you, or just outright claiming that they themselves plan to kill you as soon as the opportunity presents itself. Are we seeing these people be arrested and prosecuted for making true threats? No. What did Joe Biden do when Craig Robertson threatened to kill him? Craig Robertson, who, like I said, it was ill-advised for him to make the threat. It was, in fact, a crime for him to have made the threat. But we're talking about a man who could barely get out of his own wheelchair. We're talking about an elderly, a 74-year-old fat boy with bad back, bad legs, bad knees, barely get up off his couch. We know that, too, because that's where he was when they did it. What did Joe Biden do? Did he send the FBI to question him, to arrest him? No. He sent the FBI in a pre-dawn raid on an elderly, disabled veteran, and without conversation, murdered him. Not only is there no evidence that Robertson fired first, no one even made a claim to that effect. Right? There was no article explaining, oh, well, he came out and presented a rifle. No, it's pretty clear that what happened is they found him asleep on his couch and they just opened fire. They just showed up at his house and fired through the wall into the front of the house and just murdered him where he sat. That's how the Democrats deal with even the smallest infraction. And let's be real. Craig Robertson never posed a legitimate threat to Joe Biden. He made the explicit claim that was a crime. Absolutely. Okay, sure. I would not be terribly upset if he was arrested and spent a little time in jail even over the threat. I wouldn't be terribly upset about that at all. Especially if we actually had a legitimate 14th Amendment expectation of equal treatment under the law, but it doesn't exist. It just doesn't. We saw the radical leftists burn buildings to the ground. We saw them set fire to the St. John's Cathedral. We saw them erect their autonomous zones. This last Friday, I even made a small apology to Pam Bondi, to Red Flag Barbie, based on the arrests having been made of 3 of the terrorists from the Minnesota church attack, right? They arrested 3 of these terrorists. Don Lemon is still at large, unfortunately, but they got these 3. It's Nakima Levy Armstrong, Chantil Allen, and William Kelly. And wow, just look at these winners. Just look at these absolute winners. U.S. Department of Homeland Security called them ringleaders in a Friday press release. They said it was Homeland Security Investigations FBI who arrested civil rights attorney Nikema Levy-Armstrong, St. Paul School Board member Chantil Allen, and social media personality William Scott Kelly. On Sunday, protesters disrupted services inside City's church on Summit Avenue. On Sunday, protesters they entered the building illegally. They began their assault with an act of trespass. They were asked almost immediately to leave. William Kelly is seen on camera sometime after the event saying, they didn't even ask us to leave, right? Nikema Armstrong said, we didn't disrupt anything. We went in and sat down and joined the worship service with them. I'm like, guys, y'all know it's all on camera, right? Like, let's be real clear about that. It is not as if they were caught on secret cameras they weren't aware of. It is not even the case that it was just the congregation who were being terrorized by these sociopaths that busted out their cell phone cameras and wisely started recording footage of the ongoing activity. No, the terrorists themselves filmed and live streamed the event. They recorded their own confession to their wrongdoing, and they came immediately and tried to gaslight you. Oh, nobody asked us to leave. That's bullshit. We've got the preacher on camera explicitly telling Don Lemon to leave and then shouting for the protesters to leave, right? And to be clear, this is a private facility, right? We're talking about a church. That's a private property, private facility, right? Once someone who has authority in the private facility instructs you to leave the private facility, informs you are no longer welcome in the private facility, even if you're talking about a facility that is open to the public, it's a private facility. It's the same way it would work if you were being an asshole at Walmart and one of the employees asked you to leave. As soon as a responsible party at a private facility asks you to leave, even if the facility is open to the public, as soon as you're asked to leave, as soon as it's made clear to you that you're unwelcome, if you refuse to leave, you are trespassing. Now, fair play, there is this legal distinction, right? It's not like you can, say I get all the way to the back of the Walmart near the cargo area, and I start making an ass of myself, and somebody comes up and says, you need to leave. At the moment he says you need to leave, I'm not yet trespassing technically. If I turn around and start walking toward the door. But as soon as I make it clear that I do not intend to leave after having been so instructed by someone responsible to the private property, now you're trespassing. Bare minimum, these guys were trespassing. But as we discussed when we covered this a week ago, it's very clear the people in that church were terrified, especially the small children. We've seen the images, we've seen the video of their faces. The little boy snuggling up to his dad, crying, "Daddy, I'm so scared. What's happening? Why are they doing this?" And then the protesters were standing at the back, blocking the exit. Okay. I'm going to give you a little legal definition to understand before I go too much further into this. Do you know when legally you go from having been contacted to detained to arrested by the police? The line does not occur when the officer says explicitly, you are detained. Contacted, voluntary. Hey, buddy, I want to talk to you for a minute. Okay, cool. This is a voluntary conversation. We could chit-chat. detained. Now it's time to shut up. But when you cross the line into being detained legally is when a statement or an action by the officer would be interpreted by a reasonable person to carry the meaning that you are no longer free to leave voluntarily. The distinction is the same for the difference between detention and arrest. Usually you're looking, if you're a lawyer making the argument, usually you're looking for handcuffs or being placed in the back of a car or something to make the argument for the jump from detained to arrested, right? But there's an important line there that's it's a little tangential to the conversation. Once the officer starts to tell you that you are compelled by law to surrender property, documentation, etc. Let me see your driver's license. Well, hold on a minute. Am I under arrest? So if I'm just detained, I still have my Fourth Amendment rights. If I've been arrested, we're into a whole nother game, right? But let me get back to the detention part. This is why this is important. That distinction when you are detained is similar when you start asking the question, did you as a reasonable person feel as if you were not free to leave? Or did you feel as if you attempted to leave the place where you were, there would be consequences, that you would suffer harm or injury? Because my friends, that is the line where you cross into, were you kidnapped? Were you illegally detained? You were unlawfully detained. Because what you saw in that church was a crowd of people who entered and surrounded a group of people. They were vocal. They were aggressive. They were threatening. And I don't think any reasonable person could look at that situation and say that the individual people who were in that church, that the parishioners, not the protesters, that the parishioners would feel like they could just get up and leave without consequences, without being harassed, assaulted, attacked, or withheld by the protesters. That those people felt that equals the protesters there, every single one of them, kind of like a capital murder charge, kidnapped that congregation. They held them hostage. They held them prisoner. Now, as of Friday morning, we had the news that Nakima Shaniqua, or whatever the hell her name is, Chantil, and William Kelly were arrested. They're out. They were arrested Thursday night. Today, they're all free. They're out. Now, there's a fair point to be made. You know, justice is slow. We want it to be that way. We want it to be deliberate and careful and intentional. It is not abnormal or unusual for someone on federal charges, and devil's advocate, to be fair, they were charged with nonviolent offenses. I'm not saying that it's fair that they were charged with nonviolent offenses. They absolutely should be charged with violent offenses. They should be charged as terrorists, 100%. In fact, I would go so far as to say they should be treated like enemies of the state, because they fucking are. And that is not my opinion based on on their conduct. That is my opinion and the considered intelligible legal opinion of every intelligent person who has heard them speak, because they say it explicitly. When they tell you who they are, believe them. But the rational interpretation of what has happened here is that getting out on bond, that getting bail while investigation proceeds, while prosecution is developed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is not abnormal in the course of prosecuting justice. What is abnormal is arresting people on charges and then keeping them for years in a prison cell, in a solitary confinement cell without arraignment. Not just without a trial, without their even having been charged. And so let's be frank. The perception here is very, very important, because what it looks a fuck of a lot like is that if you are a conservative, your government will murder and torture you for disagreeing with the main narrative. I don't care if that's true or not. It doesn't matter. It does not matter if that's true. The fact is that that's what it looks like. To the voter that we need to turn out for the midterm, that is what it looks like. It looks like the liberal government will murder you for simply being a conservative, or being too far down on the victim stack, straight white male, right? That's enough to get you killed. And if it's not the government that murders you for your ideas, ideology, or just, being not the same as them, for refusing to agree. Or we got video recently of this guy going around harassing people on the street and just, going up to them. He's got somebody running a camera behind him and he's demanding, say fuck ICE. Say it. Say it. Why won't you say it? Oh. I don't understand how he hadn't got punched in the face doing that shit yet, because wow. But that's who's out there. Right? Doesn't matter what the truth is, as far as this is how justice works, this is how how the courts work, and it's not abnormal for them to get bail in these circumstances. Okay. That may all be true. But what it looks like is, if conservatives show up in a traditional public forum to gather peacefully, speak freely, and petition their government for a redress of grievances, they will be prosecuted to the fullest, to and beyond the fullest extent of the law, with illegitimate, novel case theory, given no precedent to support it. But when you're on the left, you can commit clear, violent crimes, property destruction, kidnapping, murder, attacking federal agents, obstructing justice, obstructing federal operations, aiding and abetting hostile foreign invaders, harboring fugitives, offering and providing material aid and support to the enemies of the United States of America. You do all those things and get not even a slap on the wrist if you got your septum ring and your blue hair dye. Doesn't matter what the truth is. That is what the world is seeing right now. That is what the world is seeing right now. More importantly, this year, that is what the voter is seeing right now. Like I said the other day, Donald Trump isn't going to lose the midterms. The conservatives aren't going to lose the midterms because a bunch of protesters changed our minds, right? They're not going to convince a bunch of conservatives who do want secure borders, who do want a better American economy, who do want a limited government and constitutional restrictions and a return to traditional Americana. A bunch of shitlibs with bull rings and blue hair aren't going to convince you that you should suddenly be an oikophobic xenophile that's opening your door and bringing in the hordes of the unwashed foreign invaders to violate your daughters and replace your sons. No. Instead, what's going to happen is we've lost faith that it is possible to elect a legitimate conservative government that is beholden to the Constitution and willing to perform the constitutionally required duty of the American federal government, which is to secure our borders and protect the safety and liberty and prosperity of our sovereign citizens. The sovereignty of this nation is ignored and left to deteriorate, intentionally disintegrated. And in the face of all that, those of us who still believe that we don't need to just go and murder everybody on the other side of the argument need to convince people voting still matters. And that's going to be difficult to do because it becomes more difficult every day to believe that or to pretend you believe it. But we try. All right, guys, I am going to go ahead and put a pin in it there before I get too far down that particular rabbit hole, because everything after that is just TOS violations, probably. Thanks for watching this morning, guys. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow. Be safe out there.